Yo! Welcome back to One More Mana. My name's Derik, and today we are getting into a deck tech that I thought I had already done, and I need to fix that because I haven't. I've kind of lost track, I guess, of all the decks I've deck tech so far, but this is one that I've been playing for a while that I love, and we're finally in kind of a little lull with new cards coming out that I can get to this, and it should be a deck that no one is surprised that I play. If y'all know, I talk about two things way more than anybody wants to hear about. That is Phyrexian and punching people in the face with magic cards, and most of the time, figuratively. And there's one commander that just sums that up so well, and it is Greven, Predator, Captain, the Greven himself. And if you want any of the just amazing cards in this deck, or any of the beautiful new old border cards coming out in Time Spiral Remastered, then head on over to TCG Player. TCG Player is absolutely amazing. Any cards you could ever want, you can find through TCG Player, any arts, foilings, anything like that. The feature that you can go ahead and search by LGSs is amazing. And if you use the affiliate link down in the description below, you can help support the channel in the process. We really do appreciate all the help. Now this Grevin is I love Grevin for so many reasons, and just getting it real quick rant everything aside, the lore, I really love older Magic lore, and especially when we get into the Brothers War and the Phyrexian invasion and all these different things. And for the longest time, Predator Flagship was one of my favorite cards, despite the fact I couldn't really find any good uses for it, just because I thought the Predator Flagship was one of the coolest things in Magic. And then when Grevin got this, because obviously Grevin had a card for forever, but when Grevin got this new card, I just was in love. It is so damn cool. Like in the art, and if you look at the art, you can actually see in the background, you can see Krovax and I think it's Volrath, both in the background, like their faces just staring at you with the stained glass thing. Like, oh my god, the art just is, even if there's no text on the card, I'd want to play it, but oh, always there's some text. And that just makes it so much better. So if you aren't familiar with the Gravy Man, Grevin is 3, a black, and a red for a 5/5 with Menace, and just some ridiculous abilities. First, Grevin gets +X+O, where X is the amount of life you've lost this turn. And then you have the ability, when he attacks, you can sacrifice another creature you have, draw cards equal to its power, lose life equal to its toughness, and stuff starts getting weird. This deck is so much fun. I'm not much of a Voltron player. To be honest, I don't really play a lot of, I really like punching things and I like punchy decks, but I don't play a lot of like super fast aggro decks. Really the only aggro decks I've really gotten super into is sometimes Goblins. It can be kind of aggro, and Infect, because obviously I love Infect decks and those are super aggro. But outside of that, I kind of go for more long game decks, and this is the most aggro of aggro decks. You are trying to find someone, find the weakest player, just latch onto them and take them out one by one in this weird game of using your life as a resource to the highest degree, where you're paying huge amounts of life, trying to knock somebody out, trying to get your life total back up, and just doing it again and again. The thought processes and the kind of play patterns you use in this deck are so unique. It's the type of stuff, the reason I love it so much is it doesn't feel like any other deck I've ever played, Voltron or not. You do some weird stuff, you're drawing so many cards, and it really just, it's a deck that can be super powerful, super scary, and it reminds me of Infect decks so much for this reason, that yeah, you get big, yeah, you get scary, yeah, you can take people out, but I also very rarely win with it because of the fact you're using your life as a resource. You kind of play a dangerous game. You're kind of living real close to the edge, so people can take you out, so it's not oppressive in that way. But damn, is it a good time. So yeah, we're going to be playing a lot of weird creatures that have high power, low toughness if we want to draw cards, sometimes just high power and toughness. We're doing a lot of combat trick effects that we wouldn't normally do because we can draw so many cards. We're doing some weird stuff. Stuff is going to get weird in this deck, and like I said, you're going to be playing cards you would never have looked at before in EDH, and those are sometimes, a lot of the time, the most fun decks to play. Quick disclaimer, before I get too far into the categories though, this deck can be built on a wide variety of power levels. I made some very notable exclusions just to kind of keep the deck where I want it to be. There are certain cards that do combo in a sense with Grevin, where you can just pay arbitrary life and just kill someone out of nowhere. I tried to limit those just because while I find that fun, if I did it too consistently, it's just not my play style really. So there's nothing wrong with it, so you can fill in as many as you want. But for me personally, I'll let you know which ones I left out that you might want to put in should you want to do that. And then just jumping into the creatures, we have a few different categories. Basically, the most common category in a lot of Grevin decks, and this is no different, is going to be, I like the most representative card for this to be Lupine Prototype. It's a card that is a very low CMC or mana value or whatever it's called, and very, very high power toughness or very high power low toughness, whatever it is. So for Lupine Prototype, for example, it's a 5/5 for 2 mana. So this is a great example of something that normally it doesn't really have much use, but because we can sack it, lose life, draw cards, this is phenomenal. And there's Rotting Regisaur. There's a few different cards that have been printed that basically just have really low mana cost with some crazy downside, but high power, low toughness, Phyrexian Soul Gorge, or different things like this that we throw in here. And these are just going to be what gets our engine going. We would love for one of our first attacks to be with one of these, because we can just draw so many cards to set up the rest of our plays going forward. Then you also have a category of stuff like Wall of Blood and Treasonous Ogre, and these are some of these one-shot effects I was talking about, where essentially if you get an open attack and you have one of these, you can just pay arbitrary amounts of life and just get in for lethal. We only need commander damage, which is huge, so you don't have to be paying like 40 life. You just got to pay, you know, maybe 16 life if you don't have any other life loss that turn or any other buffs. These things get real scary if you have a Wall of Blood, or especially Treasonous Ogre, because you can be casting other things. These are just some game-winning explosive type effects. Now, the one card that I did leave out purposefully, but that you're probably going to want in here if you want to make it stronger, is Cricket. You know, Yawgmoth's boy. So yeah, if you want it to be stronger, that's definitely a card you're going to want to be in there. And you're probably being like, whoa, you love Phyrexia, but you didn't put this dude in. What are you doing? And I understand where you're coming from. It was probably a mistake. But either way, this is just a card in general where the power level, I've played against it, and I just kind of don't have fun playing against it, so I figured I wouldn't want to play it myself. But nothing wrong with it. If you do want to put that card in there, just snap put it in there. It's super powerful. I just left it off as a personal choice. But yeah, these are the type of cards where these type of effects, you can hit a critical mass where you can consistently be hitting this and essentially just paying mana for things, cheating costs, and really just exploding and having some crazy turns way earlier than you should be. Now, outside of these just high power toughness and paying life, because there's quite a few if you look at the deck list, that's most of the creatures, there are a couple that I really think should be in here outside of that, just for different reasons. One's obviously anger. We need haste. Haste is huge. I didn't emphasize that enough at the beginning. Haste is huge, and we'll get into more haste effects here. Nothing feels worse than playing Grevin out with no protection and saying go, because Grevin will be enemy number one at the table. People are going to want to kill Grevin. You need to have either protection or haste so you can swing right away. So anger is great because you can also sack it to get it in your graveyard. It's a great card, obviously. And then Disciple of Bolas is huge, because if you do have that turn where you get Grevin super big and you draw all these cards and swing and hit somebody and you're down on life, you can go ahead and play Disciple of Bolas and get all of that life back and then some. Or you could even use this to sack some of your other low mana value, high power creatures to draw cards and gain some life back. It has so much utility in this deck. This is one of the most crucial creatures in the deck, so you can recover, and after you take out that first player, have a chance to go after player number 2. Now with the artifacts are very interesting to me in this deck. Mainly because it's all about budget and kind of what mana rocks you have available. I'm running a decent amount of fast mana. I'm not running all of the fast mana, so I do have things like Mana Crypt in here, Mana Vault, Grim Monolith, that type of stuff. And the best thing I'd like to say is, budget should not be a reason why you don't want to play Grevin. So, you know, if you just have, if you have all the budget mana rocks, and maybe you don't even have some of the 2 CMC mana rocks, you're playing Gilded Lotuses and Thran Dynamos and all of those types of things, and just, you know, 3, 4, or 5 CMC mana rocks and then a Soul Ring, you can still make it work. The one thing I will say is, the less fast mana you have, you're going to want to make sure you put more evasion for Grevin. And when you get the Mana Crypts and the Mana Vault and stuff out, you can get Grevin out so fast some games, the Menace by itself is enough to swing in and hit somebody. But if you're playing with a slower ramp package, still I think you can have just as much fun and be just as lethal, but you're going to want to have the Whisper Soak Cloaks and different things like that, so that way you can get the damage in. So I think that's the only really adjustment to the deck. If you have a more budget ramp package, throw those Whisper Soak Cloaks and the Trailblazers boots and things like that in, so you can still get damage in if you get Grevin out late. Because if you get him out turn 5 or 6, probably people have enough blockers where Menace isn't the evasion you need, and I think it's a really easy adjustment, and those are some budget cards that you can throw in to still get through. Now, there's really the big 3 for equipment in this deck that are just the best equipment I think that you can run in here, that are just crazy. You're going to have stuff like Basilisk Collar, because again, you get that life link to just get that life back. Shadow Spear is going to be, I think Shadow Spear is the best. Just the fact that it gives you the trample and the life link. Shadow Spear is dangerous in this deck, and really people got to get rid of that ASAP, because all of a sudden blockers don't even matter that much. And speaking of blockers not mattering, Vorak Battle Horns. This is another great equipment for those games where if you're getting out Grevin later, because it essentially just makes Grevin unblockable because of the way this card works, combined with Menace, just can't be blocked. So yeah, these 3 equipment are insane, and again, all remove on spot for your opponents, because if these stay out, you're probably going to have a legit shot to win the game, not just take that first player out, and that can be really scary, and once they get killed by it a couple times, they'll probably learn. So you got to use these strategically when you put them out. And then my one personal choice of an equipment that I just got so excited that I finally found a deck for was Butcher's Cleaver. I love Innistrad Limited, like, a lot. It's one of probably my favorite set ever as far as the limited environment. I actually never got to play it at the time. I played it more recently and spent more money than I should have to do a draft of it, and it was just, I love it. Innistrad, I think, is the coolest atmosphere and everything, really outside of any of the Phyrexian sets. And this is one of the equipment, I've watched so many drafts of Innistrad, and I love watching the humans deck use this and like do all this cool stuff, and I never found a use for it in EDH, and this is perfect. Grevin is somehow still a human despite the fact that the Phyrexian oil has done its work, and this again gives us that life link, and I get a little bit of that like not Phyrexian. I also get Phyrexian nostalgia, but I also get some of that Innistrad nostalgia with it. So this is kind of my pet equipment, and you definitely have some freedom to kind of throw in whatever cool equipment you want. Because even though it's a Voltron deck, like most Voltron decks, you want the swords and all this fancy stuff. Really in this, if anything is giving you some sort of evasion or lifelink, whatever your favorite equipment is, just throw it in and it's going to do work with Greven. With the enchantments, we have some of the most crucial cards in this deck. Fawn of Agonies is a card that has just done so much work that when you pay life, you throw counters on it, you can destroy creatures. It's really a low drop you can get out. It synergizes really well with the life loss, and being able to pick off creatures like that is huge because, again, that menace can really matter because unless you're playing against a token deck, sometimes players might only have 3-4 creatures tops throughout the course of a game. Being able to pick off a couple of them, you can be in a situation where this card can help you get in that lethal. Rite of the Raging Storm is also insane because it makes sure that you have access to these 5/1s. Your opponents get them, can't swing them at you. This is one of those cards that you feel best with because it gives you basically fodder for Greven every turn, in addition to doing this whole politics game and making your opponents hit each other, which I love. And then Footfall Crater is such an awesome card as well. I feel like I'm going through every enchantment, but I feel like I need to. Footfall Crater is... it gives you haste. It's a way to get early game to have a consistent haste enabler for your commander, and it's also super budget. A lot of the other stuff that we'll get into or we talked about with haste enablers, they can be a little pricey sometimes. This is a great budget way to get an early drop and set Greven up to start swinging. One of the coolest and most fun enchantments in this deck that really changes the game sometimes is Price of Glory. I love running this in most red decks because basically what it does is it really makes your opponents have to think twice before being able to interact at instant speed, and Greven is such a powerful deck. Your opponents have to have instant speed removal and they have to be willing to use it. And if you get a Price of Glory out, it really makes them make tough decisions. And a lot of the time, I guess it's not that tough. It's either sack some lands to cast something or die. So I guess it's not too hard of a decision. Either way, it's going to make them feel bad about having to kill your Greven. Price of Glory is awesome. We're really not doing a ton of instant speed stuff in this deck on other people's turns. It's mostly combat tricks and stuff on our turn. So it kind of is only a one-sided thing. Play group might get salty. So definitely check because people don't like sacking lands. I just think it's a good time. So I think this card is great in here. And then there's one hugely notable exclusion. I am not running Necropotence or Necropotence. Again, that was just a personal choice. That is just such a powerful card in here. I felt like this deck playing it without it and with it, I feel like it's at the power level I want it now. And I feel like adding another effect like that is just so insane in this deck kind of took it a little bit further than I wanted it to. So I didn't quite put that in there, but that is obviously, if you want to kind of take it that next level, put Necropotence, whatever it is, put it in there. That card might be the single best card in a Greven deck. So yeah, if you want to make it as strong as possible, that's an auto include in there. But instead, when I cut that card, I actually put in Season of the Witch instead. It's just a really weird old card I had that I really wanted to use, and it makes people sack creatures if they didn't attack. It kind of opens up the battlefield for you to swing in, and it also makes you pay life, so you have that little synergy. Mostly, I just think it has really cool art. So yeah, that's what I took the best card in the deck out for. The sorceries are really cool as well. So many of these cards, this is 100% a deck I recommend you look at the entire deck list, not just watching the video, because there are so many weird, cool interactions that I honestly just don't have time to go over all of them, and there's just so many awesome ones. There's some win cons I'm going to save for later. I really love Command the Dreadhorde in here, which can basically be a win con, but it's just so good. It's normally an amazing card, but in this deck, you can steal a bunch of creatures from the graveyards, get them on the battlefield, pay as much life as you want. Hopefully, you got some lifelink, Greven swinging like crazy. You got more creatures to sack. This is the type of thing that can really swing the game in your favor, which I love. Super powerful there. One of the other old random cards, and this is not a card I recommend you pick up because one, it's just way too expensive, but if you have one and you've been playing for a while, Hellfire is so good in this deck. This is one of my favorite cards. Just, I love the old school art. I think it's super cool, and it's just, I've been trying to find a home for this board wipe for forever, and this is the perfect deck for it because all your creatures for the most part will be safe. Greven will be safe. Destroy a whole bunch of creatures, lose a bunch of life, and get ready to kill somebody with Greven. Kind of like a new school sort of version of that would be like a Toxic Deluge, which is definitely more accessible and easier to get. So one of those would be great as well because you can pay life to still wipe the board, kind of control where you want that life total at, and make sure Greven survives the process. So that's also a lot of utility. But yeah, if you do have a Hellfire, this is like the best deck for it. But my personal pick for my favorite sorcery, and I feel like I've said the word favorite 900 times in this deck, if you can tell I really like this deck, is Tentative Connection. This card is so awesome. It's from Ikoria, and basically it's going to cost you 1 red because you're going to have a creature with Menace if you're using this card to steal one of your opponent's creatures, and you can immediately just sack it to Grevin. This is basically a 1 red removal spell that will help pump Grevin, draw you cards, and get your life total where you want it to be. This is such an awesome card, and it's just one of those random commons you never think you'd have a use for, kind of similar to the Footfall Crater we talked about before, that really just does so much work for the mana you're going to be spending to use it for. In the instance, we have a ton of protection. We have stuff like Rush of Vitality, stuff like Bolt Bend, Mage's Contest, which also is a cool, weird combat trick if they try to remove Grevin. These instant speed protection things are going to be super important because we do want to make sure Grevin sticks around. He's target number 1. We're in Rakdos. He already costs 5 mana. If we get to the spot where we're having to spend 7, 9, 11, you kind of get into a spot where it's really hard to win the game because so much of this deck is centered around having Grevin out. This is not the type of deck. I've actually won a game where Grevin was inaccessible and I was just swinging with random weird creatures, but that doesn't happen often. You want to have Grevin out. So these instant speed protections are super important. If you notice what's going on here, there's going to be a lot of stuff I'm going to get to in the game winning step because these instants are insane and really some of the most fun things you're going to do. With the lands, 2 colors. I always say it, lots and lots and lots of basics. We can make it as simple as we want. We want to have a lot of untapped lands so we can hit our land drops coming in because we want to get things on curve in this deck. So I would say minimize the tap lands and basics are just fine. Now, some non-basics that are kind of not budget, but they are super powerful would be Shizo, Death Storehouse, as well as having something like a Hall of the Bandit Lord to give haste. Really, a lot of the haste enabling lands that you'd run in a Goblin deck and different things like that are great in this deck. So any lands that can enable haste, I think Hall of the Bandit Lord is the best one because you're also paying life in this deck, can really make sure you get your commander ready to swing. Now, a more budget option that is obviously an auto include is going to be Rogue's Passage. I mentioned before, later game, we need extra forms of evasion. Having it on a land's obviously a no-brainer. And these are just kind of little things we can do to kind of get the deck to do what we want. But really, again, I think the focus on this is we want more untapped lands than most decks because we want to hit things on curve, so basics are amazing. I know if you're looking at the deck list, you're like, wait, you only put like 10 basics. What are you talking about? Yeah, ignore that. I spent too much money on this mana base. Not necessary at all. So again, the whole saying, do as I say, not as I do. Don't worry about all the fancy lands in there. It's really not necessary in a deck like this. So that is going to do it for all the categories. Now let's get into the best part of every deck tech. And in this case, it feels so good to say it, the most Phyrexian part, and that is the game winning step. How are we about to win the game with the Gravy Man? So there's so many fun, just being completely honest, there's so many just fun ass ways to win with this deck. There's every time you win, it's going to be something crazy that you just get way, or maybe it's just me, I get way too excited about. It doesn't happen often, but when it goes off, it goes off. And I will say the first kind of category for this are creatures that you can just manipulate your life total with. So that was the Wall of Bloods I talked about, the Molten Steel Dragons, the Treasonous Ogres. And I mentioned, like I mentioned earlier, you can throw more of these arbitrary life-paying effects in. I limited them to some degree, but yeah, that's going to be really the most explosive wins you have, where you get these out, somebody's not ready, they don't have enough blockers, and they just have to accept what's coming to them, and that is a big Phyrexian punch in the face. And that's going to be really, I think, the most common way that you see to win, as far as having these creatures just being able to swing in. And sometimes they don't have to be arbitrary life payers; they can just be something like the Phyrexian Soul Gorger, and you're just able to get in with that commander damage. Now, the second way to win the game is going to be through combat tricks. And they kind of blend together, to be honest. I kind of separated the creatures and enchantments and stuff from these instants, because these are even more tricky and a little bit more fun too. The combat tricks are crazy in this deck, and again, because we draw so many cards, they're way better than they would be in normal decks. Now, that's stuff like Fire Covenant, Teamer Battle Rage, and that's where you're just instant speed doing something crazy. Fire Covenant is great, because what you can basically go ahead and do is declare your attackers, or even before then, which when you get into combat, instant speed, just blow up all your opponent's creatures so they don't have blockers, pay a bunch of life to do it, and then all of a sudden you can just go in for the kill. Teamer Battle Rage is no surprise. It's giving it double strike. This is, again, they think they have the math done. They don't see any life-paying effects on board. They think they're safe. Bam, double strike, game over for them. And again, it reminds, and I've said it a million times, it reminds me so much of playing a dedicated infect deck. I love the fact that combat tricks are a big part of this deck. I love it. And you're going to see another combat trick we're actually going to be saving for like the best part of the game winning step that you'll see. Now, the third way to win the game is going to be through non-combat damage. And non-combat damage for a deck like this is huge, because if someone just has a Spore Frog lock on you, or if they have something like a constant miss or something you can't get out of, like a fog effect, you need other ways to win. and we have some of the best ways to do it. My personal favorite's Fling, just because it's so ridiculous. It's instant speed. People aren't ready for it. You can even do crazy stuff where you're swinging in, doing all this type of stuff. If he gets blocked, just literally fling Grevin. Just fling him at your opponent's face and have them deal with the consequences. Fling is an amazing, amazing card in this deck. And then Chandra's Ignition is just so insane. This is the type of card where you can afford to pay your life total down to the bare minimum, swing and do some damage to somebody, then Chandra's Ignition, basically just wiping the board and wiping out your opponents in the process. It is so insane. And you may be asking, Derik, Chandra's Ignition also combos with another really good card that would go into this deck. Why haven't you brought it up yet? That's a very good question. And that is because it is time for our weekly trip to Phyrexian. Now, you might be saying this whole deck tech has basically been a trip to Phyrexian. We've been hanging out with the Phyrexian boy himself, Grevin, but we're going to go deeper. We're going to go into the depths of Phyrexian now and get into the single most fun way to win the game. Just bar none, the most fun way. Now, Grevin has people doing math the whole game. People sitting there saying, okay, this much life you're paying, this much life, I'm at this much commander damage, this is going on here. The most fun way to win the game in this deck is Tainted Strike, bar none. It is such a fun way to go because people do the math. You're like, okay, Grevin's at 8 power, or Grevin's at 9 power, Grevin's at 10 power. There's nothing on board. You only got one black open. I think I'm okay. And then Infect comes through. Now, the funniest thing is, typically Tainted Strike can make people a little salty, but in this deck, there are so many more effective ways. Essentially, you have so many ways to get to 21 commander damage at instant speed that it's just one of many. So this might be, again, I always talk about kind of just dipping your toe into the Infect pool. This might be a good way to kind of get a little taste for it and see how much fun it is. And not to mention, it also combos extremely well with Chandra's Ignition, where if you get in a situation where you don't have enough life to pay, you can't get Grevin that big, just get him just big enough, Tainted Strike, Chandra's Ignition, and good game to everybody. I think that is my preferred way to win. It doesn't happen often, but when it does, it is so much fun. And that is going to do it for this week's deck tech. I really hope y'all enjoyed it. This is, again, it's such a fun deck. You really have to almost get into character when you play it, though. I kind of compare it. I was talking with someone in my play group the other day, and it was basically like, it feels like you're the horror movie villain. Like, it feels like you're like Jason Voorhees. Like, you're walking around, like, people see it coming. They know. They don't know if you're coming for them yet. They don't know if you're going for somebody else, but they know it's coming, and it's just like the boogeyman waiting to come. And in the end, most of the time, the heroes win. Most of the time, Grevin's not going to win the game, vast majority of the time. But it doesn't matter. It doesn't make it any less fun. Honestly, it's just such a different style for me. You kind of getting into that villain character, going ahead, trying to latch on, take somebody out. It's so much fun, and it makes for quicker games, which is always a good thing. Yeah, it's a really good time. If you've ever been on the fence about a Voltron deck, I think this is like a great entry point to where you can still do some cool value stuff and not feel like you're at a huge disadvantage. You can do some crazy broken things with this deck. Definitely let me know what y'all think of Grevin. Do y'all have any cool Grevin builds yourself? Have you ever played with or against Grevin? Because, yeah, depending on what side of Grevin you're on, you probably have very different opinions. And as always, a huge shout out to all the patrons. We love and appreciate y'all so much. And definitely whatever you do, come check out our weekly games of Commander Petty on Saturday nights. We've had some real good luck with some crazy games in the last couple weeks. Sed's pulling out some cards that he drew with a crayon before the game. I swear he definitely drew that card with a crayon, where he's deflecting damage, making effects up. We're basically playing by Yu-Gi-Oh rules. Either way, come hang out. It is always a good time. And don't worry, there's plenty of stuff left. There's actually a couple personal decks I've realized I've never deck teched, so more to come. But until then, I will see y'all next time.